Hello and welcome. You're with the Economic Times, and my name is Ashutosh Sinha. Today, we'll be talking about leveraging new age enterprise workforce brought to you by the DataTech Labs and the Economic Times. So let me explain first why this is so critical for tomorrow's businesses. You and whole host you as a viewer and a whole host of other people around you, they've been witness to and a part of a tectonic change in the way the workforce is changing for enterprises. There's automation happening, digital technologies are changing, the skill sets needed to be part of the workforce, traditional job roles are evolving, and new technologies are, of course, transforming the way work is performed. And of course, making newer possibilities. It's opening up the doors and windows, so to say, for newer possibilities as well. But enterprises will continuously need to evolve and focus on reskilling and upskilling its workforce to survive and succeed in the post-pandemic era. Collaboration, metrics for productivity, and the very nature of the way work is delivered is undergoing a change, as we mentioned as well. So do employers drive it more than employees? Is technology helping solve the problem, or is it a permanent behavioral shift among the employees, given that technology is aiding, making it easier for them, making remote working possible, and a whole host of other issues? There are so many changes, as I mentioned, that are happening. So to talk about all of that and more, we have a very seasoned group of professionals here today. And let me introduce to them. Bajwa, Global Head Learning and Development at Tata Communications. Pallavi Tyagi, Chief Human Resources Officer at Capgemini, India. Dr. Urmi Chatterjee, Vice President HR at Honeywell APAC. Chaitali Mukherjee, Partner and Leader, People and Organization, PwC, India. Amit Mehta, Head of AWS Training and Certification, India. And Dr. Amit, the CEO of DataTech Labs. So they all are joining today. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll talk over the next 90 minutes. But first, let me invite Chaitali Mukherjee to set the context of the massive changes that are happening and give us a sense of what are some of those key issues. Chaitali, over to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Good afternoon, everyone, and absolute pleasure, to be on this conversation today and have this very interesting conversation going. Very simply, the way you actually put it, Ashutosh, was very interesting, right? You spoke about how the world has changed, and we are actually interested in talking about enterprise workforce. And this is a very, very important one that we actually want to start talking about. As I start off talking on this, so let me talk a little about my sources because sources are very important. As I consult with multiple clients across industries, it is about working with maybe 300 plus CHROs and CEOs over the last few months and maybe last 18 months to be precise, trying to understand what is the journey of organization in addition to what we have been experiencing as PwC globally as well as locally. But we also did a research last year. Around October, we launched our report in partnership with NHRDN, where we had spoken about reimagining the new ecosystem and spoke about what are some of the big shifts. And it's a good time to actually look at the data because it's a year from there and what has actually changed. But before I get into that, I think the important two pieces that I'm hoping I can leave on the table before our August panel takes it up is the changes and challenges across the entire hire to retire life cycle and some of the reimagining enterprise workforce considerations. So let's try and understand what did we see, and I'm going to get all of them together. I think the whole talent acquisition, the journey before the pre-COVID era was very skill-focused conversations, assessments, and interviews, talent through generic sources. After the whole era of what has happened with us, one of the biggest shifts that has happened is We were using analytics and AI across various industries, but the need to do it faster, better, and huge dependence on technology to actually go to known, unknown sources of talent has actually gone very high. One. Second, I think the whole focus on values. How do you actually measure values alignment, culture alignment using technology? Considering now I may not always have the option of meeting in person when I'm hiring in bulk. I think onboarding, earlier the whole onboarding journey was about the process of being part of any organization that was you were becoming a part of. Today, those operational functional sessions have actually taken a back seat, and there is huge focus on helping employees understand what is the ethos of the organization, what does it stand for, and how do you do a bit of an employer employee expectation setting to make it a win-win situation. And this puts a very important thinking. It is no more a game of employer hiring an employee. It's an employer and employee on the same pedestal. Talent management, I think this has been one of the biggest shifts from an era of static operating model to going to moments that matter based, activity and skill based operating model, and looking for different spaces to go for talent and workforces has become a huge requirement. Also, one of the things that I'm seeing most organizations toil around is the whole thinking around compensation. How will I actually put the compensation now differently, considering my employees are seeking very different aspects in life? Performance management and succession, again, from target based performance across the year to a just in time team performance and productivity metrics completely having changed. And finally, the exit management. If my employee is not joining me full time anymore, and I'm going to have a huge bulk of my employees who are not my full time employees, and they are not going to actually join me to leave me per se, because they're going to operate in the periphery and they're going to be very critical to my success. How do I define employee experience for all categories of talent who are important for my organization? And hence, what does an exit management process mean after all, both for in house talent as well as for talent which is actually going to always be outside? And I think the key shifts that employees, or should I say, workforce, has actually pushed organizations to consider has been the whole employee health, safety, and well being. From an era where it was okay for organizations to think it's a big thing that I'm doing for my employees, to today, where it is a non negotiable. And well being is no more a good to have, but an absolute important piece that you have to have as part of your moments that matter employee experience. Of course, the whole employee connect, the trust based digital and hybrid work environment. But at the heart of all of this is actually the culture. What kind of culture uh, that I'm trying to build in my organization, and how do I translate it to all my people consistently when I'm not able to reach all of them at the same time using the infrastructure that I had. My infrastructure was a huge asset for me that I was using to live the culture, exhibit the culture, and get people to experience the culture. And finally, the whole aspect of upskilling. Today, when employees want to choose what kind of upskilling they want, how does an organization make employees choose capability building that is important not just for them, but also for the organization? How do you get the organization and their individual purpose to align has become one of the biggest challenges. The way we are looking at some of these big shifts are work, of course, is actually getting majorly reconfigured. Automation has a role to play. But one of the biggest one is activity-based working and skill-based work. From the past, where organizations used to think of technology as a way to become faster, better, sharper, today organizations are thinking of technology as a means to completely redefine what work I'm doing in the first place, and even if that work is required. So many clients we spoke with spoke about how they realized there were pieces of work that they were doing and nobody missed not doing that work actually. Of course, I spoke about workforce remodel, the dynamic distributed workforce, wider tool, talent pool, and how do you actually get everybody aligned? And finally, the workplace. Will I have all digital? Will I have all hybrid? Will I have all at the office? Or will it be a combination of those? What would that mean in terms of choices that I make? And what should my workplace stand for? Should it be a center of innovation and learning alone? Or should it be center of innovation, getting teams together and learning? And organizations are doing a lot of these conversations. What we came out about 18 months back was the three big shifts that organizations need to consider, which was reconfiguring the operating model, re-looking at the capability index, and re-looking at what is the kind of culture organizations need to build. Quite interestingly, in the 18 months, each of these have become even more true. So what are these three which we could actually consider as we think of workforce shifts that are happening? Never ever would you ever look at an operating model and in an operating model talk about engagement. The future operating models are not only going to be dynamic in nature, but they are going to be a combination of thinking of the delivery model, thinking of productivity, but also thinking of engagement. And that to me is a very important employee ask that has actually come up, and organizations can no more avoid it. Let's look at the next one. When I think of capability, earlier when organizations spoke about capability, the capability conversation was more around skills or technical competence. Today, when you're looking at capabilities, it's not just skills, typically functional skills. It's not just digital skills. There is a huge component of leadership skill which everybody needs to have across the spine. But most importantly, the two most important ones is the mindset. If I can't align my people, regardless of what kind of workforce model they are a part of, if I can't align their mindset to the organization's mindset, it will become a near impossibility to get them to deliver what the organization wants. And finally, the kind of relationships. If a talent does not know how to build, nurture relationships, when we will not have the environment of all being at the same place at the same point, it will become very, very difficult. We call it five in a box. And I think this is going to be one of the most important things that organizations and employees will need to transact between. And finally, the culture. So earlier, whenever we spoke to organizations, they spoke about engagement. Engagement today is very well understood as not just an outcome of what people are made to feel, but it's a combination of culture, which is what I see, feel, do without even realizing, and the experience that I'm landing for my people in an indifferent way. I think today organizations are so well connected that employees, even if they are coming as a gig to your organization, want to go and check out what is the experience that this organization gives and what is the culture that stands out. If we look at these three building blocks of an operating model where a workforce has come right at the center, I decide my workforce based model, workforce based workplace, and workforce's needs based work. And again, I look at capabilities, which is going to be very varied, and culture where the employees are calling the shots. I think the role, the job, and the challenge is all cut for all of us. So I think on that note, I want to open it up back to you, Ashutosh, to take the conversation from here and get the conversation going. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot to talk there, and really too many issues that have been raised. And well, let's start the conversation. To the experts, you'd like to hear them. So let me just point out some of the points that I mentioned, some of those key words that was mentioned by Chaitali there. HR processes, workplace, people, health and safety, technology, remote working, didn't refer to that, but hinted at that, values, and the word that it all boils down to, culture. So Urmi Chatterjee, subtly, is there too much on the plate to handle? How have the needs of companies changed? This looks more than just what we were referring to earlier as tectonic shift, perhaps something more than that.
Yep, absolutely, Ashutosh, and Chaitali covered a lot of it, which is today's reality. Just engaging with your new workforce, people you have built relations over the years, is slightly easier when you are completely virtual to be able to manage, right? But people who are coming into the workforce in the last 18 months, they don't know the organization to be proud of. They just don't know what has happened, the history. They've not met the leaders. They've not felt the pulse of the organization. So absolutely a big shift, I would say. And as organizations, we have also, fairly, I would say, have been fairly agile to respond to it. Maybe it took us a quarter to figure out that when they're based different parts of India, sitting out of their hometowns and trying to still be a part of our organization, how do you connect to them? We have done a fantastic job of a virtual tour of the organization, so that when we are doing induction, we're very proud of our labs in the organization, especially the aerospace ones and, some of the, the process solutions ones. And you just don't get a feel of the organization and what technology you work with at Honeywell unless you see those labs with complicated machines and, things that you are building. So we came up with a virtual tour of it so that we can take people and show them, even though they are not here. And we're slowly coming back to work. And we're just hoping that that's a starting point for some of those people to come back and understand what have they got themselves into. Because like, we discussed, the starting point of engagement of an organization begins with the people, the leadership, the culture, what you see around you, right? Some of the ethos and the values. And I'm sure all organizations have responded to this fairly quickly.
So the big changes that were mentioned. So one of the key words again there from Chaitali's point was operational function has taken a backseat. That's what I noted from what she was speaking. So how do companies then, maybe Ina, if you'd like to take that question, how do companies judge someone for the value or, gel with those values? How do employees for tomorrow, how do companies prepare for those employees and merge them and prepare them with the values that the company stands for?
Yeah, Ashutosh, I was coming in even on the earlier question because,
sure.
wanted to weigh in a few thoughts there. So I think the pandemic actually has, shined a spotlight on the long-standing issues that corporates have been facing, right? So I think most of the organizations across industries are witnessing great resignation. And it's actually, we've read a lot of research that it is not really, it's an opportunity for organizations for greater traction. But I think in my point of view, it's also a showcase of employees that they are rejecting organizations and the old patterns of working and the old habits and mindsets, right? So their needs have changed and they expect a whole lot more from their leaders and from their organization. So, in Tata Communications, we've always believed that the role of a people manager is at the forefront of driving culture and driving inclusive leadership and inclusive employee experience. And I think the pandemic has just, made that into a soaring level of responsibility. There's this whole conversation around psychological safety that we've been talking about, but I think it's just come to the forefront because you cannot drive inclusive leadership without providing that, to your employees. Of course, while, managing the values alignment and, the cultural alignment and making sure that they continue to perform while they are dealing with the, exhaustive, set of changes that they're going through. So, enabling them essentially and, making sure that they are able to drive the employee experience that the companies continue to expect, I think will be, predictive of how organizations leverage talent, to remain competitive in the marketplace. One of the things that we did in Tata Communications was that we realized that, we are expecting so much out of the people managers. What is it that we are doing for the people managers, right? So we launched a program for them for our 2,500 leaders and people managers across the globe, and we called it Leading from Inside Out. So basically, it's not any of those normal programs that devise or talk about other skills of leadership, where it basically focuses on that how do you leverage your inner core so that you're able to use that as an authentic expression of your leadership and drive the outer impact. And we've got fantastic responses, and our engagement results have been fine. Of course, attrition continues to hit most of the organizations, but we feel that if we continue down this path, it'll see us good results.
Okay, also let me, Chaitali, before I come to you, just let me also take a reaction from Pallavi, because tech is one of the areas which was at the forefront of change, led, the industry also was helped because of the very need of the industry. So, Pallavi, if you can give an input on how it has been a challenge for you, and everyone's also talking about the war for talent. So, in these times, how are you balancing between the two?
Ashutosh, hi, thanks for the question. And not surprising, I get the talent demand and supply question.
Well, of all the tech companies, about half the cost is, half the cost of revenue is talent. So is the cost of people.
Yeah. So, well, there are many ways that when one can look at the war of talent, which is happening across industries, across the world, and look at how one balances out the two. And I'll talk about the supply side and how we could look at, how we have looked at Capgemini. So one of the pool of talent that we have looked at tapping is the alumni community, right? And these are colleagues who've been with Capgemini, know Capgemini, and improves our employer branding. And it also gives us that diverse and a more increased scope of talent pool. So that's one way of we are looking at it. The second is, we think about the right is not right anymore. So here what we are saying is that we all know that we need to hire for a role, and that is something that Chaitali also brought out in her address. But what is that right that one is looking for, right? So we've spoken about being aligned with values, etc., by our previous esteemed panelists. But it is also about not looking at focusing one's search on just a particular skill set. And one could look at hiring a particular skill set, for instance, and then looking at taking through a learning and development journey, which would then fulfill the requirement of a role that one might have. The third is one can look at investing early. And that's another way of looking at talent available, which is not, again, coming back to not is about necessarily skilled with what the organization needs are. And then you have in-house training, upskilling. We also tie up with our partner firms. We also are partnering with universities to helping build curriculum that would kind of look at providing the talent that we might need at Capgemini. And last but not the least is build versus buy, where the shortage of talent supply could be provided by just building our own internal talent pool. So that's the first thing that we look at, right? So we are looking at providing our colleagues the resources, the guidance to skill and upskill themselves, so that we are providing them the career opportunities that they are seeking, the career progression that they are seeking. So it's always for us internal first, and then looking at external. And as you rightly mentioned, technology is a primary facilitator in all of this. So one can look at borderless hiring, one can look at upskilling employees in a hybrid setup. Technology ensures accessibility, consistency of employee experience, and also security. And it, of course, when we are looking at hiring, it also helps removes any biases that might come in. And that's how we are looking at the talent of demand and supply and taking it forward.
Okay, Pallavi, Chaitali, if you can make your brief point, and then we go to Amit, both the Amits. We have two Amits today.
So yeah, I think the only one I wanted to say on the point, Ina, you made, the burden for leadership has become profound. And there is so much expected to get things right for the workforce by managers. And managers are actually feeling themselves to be the most important link, but also the most troubled link. And organizations need to appreciate, understand, because my conduit to my workforce is my manager. And what are we doing about that? So I think that was a very important one that you did point out, and I just wanted to call it out.
Okay. Amit, Mehta, your point about how technology is aiding better connectivity, better possibilities, if you can share a little bit on that first, and then we, of course, get to the other specific points as well.
Yeah, sure, Ashutosh. So I think I'm going to talk to what Chaitali referred to, in a 5 in a box, the digital and the functional skills. So if you really see, the post-pandemic world has accelerated the digitization initiatives of all organizations, because there's no way you can serve, if at all anything the pandemic has taught us, you need to digitize faster. And that's now, just in terms of priority as per an IDC report, just priority number 1 or number 2 in any of the boardroom discussions. So the question then is, if digitization is the way to go, and that's number 1 priority, where is the skill with respect to that? And if you just see with respect to India also, India wanting to become $1 trillion digital economy by 2025, and the pandemic accelerating it. So we had some interesting findings from a research we did as it relates to digital skills. The first one was only 12% of India's workforce is digitally skilled. The number of people who are required to be digitally skilled is going to grow 9 times by 2025. And the 5 top digital skills that are required are cloud architecting and design, because cloud is one of the key technologies for you to deliver digitization. Cloud architecting and design, software operations and support, because the number of applications and softwares you're rolling out in customer delivery and experience is huge. The third one is around cybersecurity. The fourth one is, we talked about data. Data is number 2 or number 1 on the boardroom priorities. Leveraging AI and data and large-scale data modeling for making better decisions is number 1 or number 2. And then you have mobile application development and web application development. So these 5 skills, of these, cloud architecting is right now growing as the fastest CAGR of about 34%. So in respect to digital skills, I think that's what is really required. And for us, our initiatives are aligned to how do we quickly try and bridge that skill gap, because our ecosystem was not just producing enough talent for the industry to absorb. And the industry suddenly realized that their plans, which were spanning years and quarters, now need to be compressed to days and weeks. And that's where the effort of AWS, for instance, in industry, is how do we really compress that cycle. And so that's the digital skill. Specific to the technology that you mentioned, the piece, again, this is a piece that Chaitali alluded to. How do you take the manual tasks and activities of a job and automate that? So the role of automation, AI in that space is something that, across segments and industries is something that we're working on and enabling our customers to do that, and move the other pieces of the puzzle to more productive elements of the job, which is innovation, which is really, writing new code faster and better. And then, the point that we talked about, in the new environment, we were onboarding employees in the virtual world. So suddenly, if remote working or hybrid working is going to be the need of the hour, and that's going to be the case in the foreseeable future, how do you ensure that you have that good collective experience from a technology delivery standpoint and just a simulation of the new workforce?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Amit, Andre, while technology may be enabling it, the big issue comes about that culture and about that feeling when you work for a particular brand. How does technology enable that? And what is the possibility? Ultimately, people relate to a culture, a way of working. Probably they still don't relate to devices and machines as much.
Absolutely right, Ashutosh. And that's where I was also trying to come in. Here, as we all are speaking about workforce development, digital skills, there are 3 important factors which every organization these days has to consider, which basically are people in the organization, around the organization, processes in the organization and around the organization, and technology, which is in the organization, around the organization. Now, the change or the shift which probably have to be considered and implemented is the experience which is given while upskilling on these three pillars. So we, as Amit sir said about the digital skills, Urmi madam said about the functional skills, Chaitali madam said about the cross-functional skills. The parameter of skilling, reskilling, and cross-skilling people is more driven towards the experiential learning and implementation of that over the content piece. In initial days, or probably 3 days or 5 years ago, we were talking about the content and content which needs to be delivered, or hands-on which needs to be done, irrespective of whether it's people, process, or technology. But today, it's more of experience, probably because the most important factor is today you Google and you have the concept, you have the knowledge on what it is. But the hurdle of every employee, whether it's a junior most employee to the senior most employee, is how and where to apply that particular concept and knowledge which have been gathered from all the various sources. So when we talk about reimagining the complete skill force or workforce in the enterprise segments, we will have to identify correct parameters which will talk about experiential learnings around people, process, and technology to upskill, cross-skill the teams to have maximum efficiency.
Okay, get the point. The larger point then is still about the collaboration. Of course, culture is one part of it and values one part of it. The larger point also for a company like Honeywell, let's say, Urmi, how do people go about with the innovation, with the teamwork, with the collaboration part? And is there an option to actually do it using machines remotely, sitting remotely?
Yes, maybe a year and a half back, I would have had a very different view of the whole thing. But we really felt, and we did it very, very significantly, we felt that this was one way to engage people virtually. And we actually used innovation as one of the biggest muscles to engage and bring people together. So even today morning, I was remotely in a panel for one of the particular businesses within Honeywell, where they had done a virtual contest. A huge number of ideas were submitted by employees virtually. And then, they had selected 270 and the top 10 were getting presented with a group of panelists. We were all virtual. But what we did during this period was the problem statements, from the kind of technologies Honeywell offers started, people started coming up with new problem statements. So we spoke a lot about connected buildings and connected aircrafts as a part of our technologies. We started talking about safety, right? We started talking about a lot more about where do employees feel more safe. And in a multiple of the idea contests that we had in the 1 year, number of amazing ideas have come up. So to your question, Ashutosh, it's that we are able to engage people, ideas are coming in because the market needs have changed, and that's giving some space for new ideas to come in. Virtually, people are engaging, and the role of the manager has become huge because they're bringing everybody together to get it. But now is the time, maybe we are also feeling that in spite of having those ideas to really get them to products that we need to deliver to the markets, it's time that certain parts of the population need to be back, right? So they need to be in person there and collaborate a little more to be able to really deliver what as ideas we found them to be extremely innovative. So we always, throughout the period, Ashutosh, we always had 10 to 15% of our population throughout in our premises, because that's the kind of a work they required to do. We rotated the kind of the people who could come, but we always had 15% of the people present because otherwise work wouldn't have got done. We are slowly increasing it just to get back the whole collaboration piece of it to be able to come back. So we are expecting that to go up, but we really did have a pleasant surprise that people could still come up with a lot more innovative products and ideas, even not being present physically in the organization.
Amit, Mehta, so I'll come back to that point again Chaitali made, and Chaitali's probably raised quite a few interesting points throughout that conversation of hers, her presentation. The words again she used was operational function has taken a back seat. How is it getting back to normal, and how are people getting ready for that? Maybe over the next 12 to 18 months or even 24 months? How are they preparing for it?
Is that for me, Ashutosh?
Yeah.
Okay, so, a number of things have happened, just from a operations standpoint. If you see what's happened is post-pandemic, one of the things that happened is that the physical density of labor workforce in an environment is now going to be determined as to what technology options you're going to be, deploying. So, one is looking at technology to help with the physical density or lowering the physical density. And it is here, for instance, where some of the jobs are morphing. So, for instance, jobs in, let's say, in manufacturing, jobs in, let's say, in physical contact centers. These are gradually morphing into, chatbots, robotics, or there's more work now being in the, in the distribution centers and the delivery centers. So one is the nature of jobs kind of morphing. The second is just from a engagement, how we're looking at operationalizing, as people get back into the space. So one is managing the physical density. The other is just a more empathetic leadership view of how these things are going to be done and the focus on metrics on driving the business. So just the softer aspects of leadership of integrating the workforce back into the business. And the third really is, just looking at ways of developing learning development plans across the different skill force. So this is really about looking at the non-tech workforce and the tech workforce and developing what the landscape of skills look like to be able to navigate this new world. So look at it from the perspective of operations and what can be automated and how can the physical density be reduced. Look at it from the perspective of what is the skilling and the upskilling path that is required. And the bigger one is really around the empathetic and the role of heart-centered leadership as people get into the workforce and providing that psychological, safe and inclusive work environment.
Okay, Ina, if you can also, so we'll try and now get to the talent part of it, because again, that is one of the issues. We refer to it at the beginning of the program. So, how are enterprises building technical awareness? And I'm not talking specific to your company, but across industry when you look at. So how they're building technical awareness and skills so that employees can efficiently operate in that remote world as they go about, using the digital opportunities and, the digital facilities and access that they have.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashutosh. So I think, the organizations or the enterprises really, one, took to procuring products that could enable collaboration. Microsoft Teams, Zoom, is a fantastic example. I think most organizations sort of quickly got to that, and we can see how these companies' profits have shot up over the last 1.5 years. And I think also in the talent space, the HR tech market, if you really see, has I think 2x more products that there were perhaps pre-pandemic, right? So you talk about the LMSs or the on-demand platforms. You talk about the talent mobility platforms and the whole integration that it offers. And I think it offers an excellent sort of vantage point to organizations because, while the pandemic has really challenged the ways of working and, the employees have very slowly gotten on to being comfortable with the digital platforms, it also offers a lot of opportunity to build scale and bring in consumer grade platforms, just like employees experience in their personal lives, right? So if they are accessing, let's say on Netflix to watch whatever series, I think the question that is getting asked by the organizations is that, why don't we bring that kind of experience internally, right? Either in the L&D platform or how that gets linked to the career progression, aspects. So I think I see at least that a lot of organizations have taken to it. and they are very quickly moving towards it. There are some industries that I think are slightly behind the pace, let's say manufacturing or some of those traditional organizations, but most organizations have really caught up in that pace.
Amit, you want to make a point? Amit Andre, that is.
Yeah. As Amit, Mehta and Ina rightly said, the fundamentals of L&D strategy these days is divided into 9 dimensions, which is further divided into or classified or clustered into 3 segments. We need to start with identifying the correct foundation, which defines the strategy. I would say learning strategy or skilling strategy, learning methodology, and segmentation, which is the foundation layer of every workforce planning dimension. Post which we come to the resources. In resources segment, we basically define the correct skill gap parameters, correct technology, correct data, automation, AI part of what needs to be around the implementation of learning strategies. And the third, and which is the most important part, which comes with experience these days, is the value. It's not a transactional course which is done for 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, or a boot camp which happens. But what is the value which is being made out of the foundation and the resources which is being planned, which depends on 3 important parameters, which defines the implementation strategy, measurements, and aligning all the measurements with business outcomes. And these 3 will create an impact of defining the correct skilling or workforce for every organization, all the segments.
Okay. Let me also go to Pallavi here and see if she can take this question about the sector itself. Because again, I'm so keen to know about the sector because in the context of India, it is very important, $180, $190 billion industry. And how is it going ahead with the learning and development programs? The big picture, particularly because they could rise. We saw in the 2001 time, if I just give a context, during that slowdown, the industry grew by leaps and bounds. This looks like another one of those opportunities. Pallavi.
Thanks for that question. And, the first and the foremost, and we've spoken about it earlier also, is to have a learning culture. And with that learning culture, one also needs to imbibe a growth mindset as we build that learning culture within the organization. So first things that one can look at is a participant pull, and not a learning push, from an organization perspective. So what that means is that instead of having that one can have standardized courses, we also need to talk to our colleagues about what are the new hot skills of tomorrow and what are the areas that they could upskill in. And then one could look at creating learning journey paths, which is more closely associated, customized to an individual career path. So that's the approach basically that we are taking, is to look at a digital learning ecosystem that enables employees to build their own learning. And Capgemini enables the broad framework which is needed to enable the same. So that's one of the things that we are doing. The second is to look at multiple skill sets. So learning curriculums that allow for learning multiple skill sets simultaneously are also very effective, is what we have realized. And this helps employees to look at application of capacities acquired from one domain to the other. And this includes whether it is technology, it's soft skills, or it is domain or industry knowledge, role-specific skills. And at Capgemini, we are enabling it through curated learning journeys in our learning platform Next, which has access to about 230,000 courses at any point in time. Mm-hmm. And the third, which is important but not the least, is community learning, right? So we have frameworks that define skill sets which are needed for key communities. And this provides a roadmap where employees can collaboratively learn from each other along with their peers. So we have at Capgemini matured communities like the architect community. We have a Millennial Garage, Ashutosh. I mean, physically, of course, it's not possible, but at one point in time, we did have a physical infrastructure in place, and we called it the Millennial Garage. Now, virtually, what we have is our younger colleagues who come together in a environment where there is area where they can learn from. There are projects which are handed over, and you have mentors who help complete that project. So it's like on-the-job learning, but in an ecosystem or an environment, and we call it the Millennial Garage. So there are many such examples of communities that we have created within Capgemini India, which helps learning. So those are some of the examples where we think that while you keep the big picture in mind, you also then look at enabling our colleagues to build an individualized and customized career path. And that helps the organization build capabilities as well overall.
Sure. So Chaitali, which are the industries which have taken a lead in this transition and transformation, which could be a model, or probably some other sectors could look at them and learn from them in probably the new ways of working?
So I think, Ashutosh, that's a difficult one, because within each industry sector, organizations have operated differently. Having said that, I think if I think of the needle movement by industry, I think the maximum needle movement happened in the manufacturing sector, because the manufacturing sector had a certain view of nothing can happen outside the workplace. So from that perspective to actually today, where they have diligently gone ahead and identified, like I mentioned, jobs that will never need to be done, 2 jobs that can actually be done digitally or in a hybrid manner, and jobs that of course need to be where you need to be. And that, I think, is going to completely change the technology-led digital transformation agenda of all manufacturing companies. And this I'm saying even for the largest automotive companies or the big ticket manufacturing companies, being very conservative in the past of making any changes happen, to now actually looking at it. So from a mindset shift perspective, I think for them it has been a big leap. For the GICs, GCCs, which is a very, very large component of India's brand, should I say, of talent, I think they are the ones who are actually struggling today in terms of taking a solid view on which direction to go. Because there isn't anything that I would stand up and say their employees believe that can't happen virtually. Because the employee is applying the lens of his or her job. But one of the primary reasons for success of GICs, GCCs in India was not because of what they did, but it was because of how they got it done. And the culture of those organizations, capability building of those organizations was an intricate part. And that part actually got done at the workplaces. So while the work is getting done, how it's getting done is getting depleted. And I like to always talk about trust on credit and trust on debit. We could pull it off for 18 months because there was trust on credit. I knew the people, so we were all able to manage it really well. Now when I'm having a big bulk of people who have never met, who I don't know, the trust on debit is going to actually kick in. And now that's where the organizations, the HR in particular, is losing sleep. And I'll tell you what, sorry, I'm taking a slightly longer one on this one. Sure. HR has been put on the spot in the GICs and GCCs because businesses are being asked to take the decision, but businesses also don't know what to do because the business leaders can take decisions, but only within the realm of what they can do. There is a global organization which has set some standards. If those standards are to be met, they have to get everybody to come to workplace, which basically means they have to go and give the very difficult message outside that everybody needs to be back, which they don't want to do. So the message is actually being passed on to HR to solve the problem. So all of this has also exposed a very interesting phenomena or a leadership lacuna, should I say, of dealing with ambiguity and taking decisions independently or taking risk. That I think the silver lining to me is Indian leadership has always been known for execution excellence. In another 18 months, Indian leadership will actually cross the line on amazing ambiguity management if they can come out of this situation of going ahead, taking the call, making it happen. Employees are holding organizations to ransom, and organizations will have to take a call.
Wow, tough words, tough words. But unfortunately, that looks like a reality as well. Pallavi, if I can just come to you on broadly that point, as well as, because again, the industry worked through the difficult times. I know the kind of, and everyone's aware of the kind of effort that was made to get people to work from home and meet some of the needs for global markets. How are some of those issues that Pallavi again raised, Chaitali again raised, how are some of those issues being addressed? Are they being addressed enough?
So working from home when the pandemic happened was a quick turnaround for us, right? In terms of we already had work from home policies. So it was not new to us, Ashutosh, in terms of, what are the support that is required, whether it's from an infrastructure perspective, cybersecurity perspective, from delivering business results. Of course, moving our employee base towards totally virtual was what we focused on. But more important than that was the health and safety of our employees. And that was our primary priority. We looked at because people are at the heart of the work that we do, and we believe in people first philosophy within the organization. So whatever we do is definitely put under the umbrella of what is the health and safety requirement that we need to keep first for our employees, and then we take decisions. And that is what we have always focused on. And of course, it became a much, much bigger focus. In fact, happiness and well-being became a very important part of the HR agenda in 2020 and continues to be so even now. There are various initiatives that we have taken. We put it under the broader ambit of happiness and well-being, right? So health and well-being, of course, being the primary need, but also how do we look at taking it forward from health and well-being to happiness and well-being, and we put it under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion overall. And we've conducted many such, not only sessions and workshops, but we also had inner learning circles where employees could come in a controlled environment of being supported by trained psychologists and talk about what they were going through at any point in time. We've also had many wellness sessions, which I'm sure many organizations did as well, which was extremely well received and participated. So those are some of the actions that we continue to keep taking. But again, as I said, for us, the health and well-being of our employees is absolutely core and comes first.
So true for all companies, I'd imagine. But Pallavi, I also understand that you have to leave, something urgent. So we won't hold you back. And thank you so much. Despite your pressing time, you could take out the time to be with us for this conversation.
Thank you again once for inviting me. And thank you for such a wonderful discussion. Thanks, Ashutosh.
Thank you so much. And we'll catch you again. Pallavi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, we have some questions coming in, and let's go to those questions. Let's see if we have Sahil Nair who's joining us to ask that question. And I'm sure Chaitali, you've raised some points that have got people's minds, got into people's minds. Sahil, if we can have you on camera, if you would like to ask the question. Okay, so let's wait while he finishes. We can try and get him in just a couple of minutes and ask him what he has to say as well. Meanwhile, since we're talking of the learning and development, what are some of those gaps that you see, Amit Mehta, which need immediate attention? Okay, Sahil is here. Sahil, would you like to ask your question, please?
Sure, Ashutosh. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Fantastic. Very, very good afternoon to everyone. Nice to hear you guys. I think it was a very, very interesting panel, great deliberation of thoughts. And I'd put my question on the Q&A, but I'm happy to just play it out to everyone. I think we spent a good amount of time talking through
connectivity issues, something that, the pandemic has also raised so much. I was asking about, okay, we'll just get to Sahil in a bit, but I was asking Amit Mehta about some of the pressing needs, where some of the gaps that are very, very clearly visible and where immediate attention could help companies, help enterprises immediately.
So Ashutosh, we talked about the digital skills and the fact that cloud architecting is the #1 digital skill that is required. So one clear pressing need for India as such to get to that $1 trillion digital goal is to how quickly we can fill the gap in the area of cloud skills. So today, just for context, we have about 800, as per NASSCOM job survey, we have about 825K odd, requirements for people with cloud skills, and the gap is around 265,000. By the year 2025, we need about 2.2 million people in cloud skills, and the projected supply is about 1.45 or so. So essentially, the gap needs to be addressed from 2-3 places. One, clearly, what can we do in the early career space in the university STEM graduate space, where about 3 to 4 million STEM graduates, what can we do to impart curriculum to them which is industry ready? So one of the big discussions we have at Amazon Web Services with the industry is, how can we get a person and reduce the time to readiness from 8-9 months out of college just to be day one ready? And the first thing that we're doing in that space is just get curriculum, which is what the industry needs, such that people can be functional day one. And we kind of also have a combination of employability skills in that space. So first is, and there are programs like AWS Academy, which attempts to do that. The second is, if you see the India workforce, there are about 4.6 million IT BPM workers, but about 1.7 million of those, again, as per the same NASSCOM report, they are the ones who have the relevant digital skills which are needed here and now. These are skills in cloud, AI, ML, IoT, big data, etc. Now, how do we quickly reskill this 1.7 million people, especially, what's the urgency of action there? And that's where the need to work with organizations and create specific learning paths which will align to the business plans of the organization. So, that's the second dimension. The third, and this is an interesting one, how do you diversify the talent pool? And this is where the issue of people who want to transition from non-tech roles to new roles, because if you see a cross section of industry, which is either, let's say, retail, whether it is travel, there are a lot of that section of people want to transition into newer tech kind of roles, because that's where the role and the wages have increased. So how do you get and diversify this talent pool? So working with unemployed youth, working with people in the non-tech sector, working with people, let's say women who want to come back in the workforce, working with that set of talent pool and getting them ready for the workforce. So I think those are the 3 areas, the skill being related to clouds and particularly data and analytics. And those are the 3 cohorts that will kind of fulfill that. And that's something that is required on a war footing now.
Okay. So Sahil is back with us. Let's, Sahil, if you can just go ahead and ask your question, please.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ashutosh. Sorry for the inconvenience caused, but I'll keep it very brief. I think we were speaking about the great resignation, the perfect storm, where the war for talent has been discussed to death. I think the question primarily is, in this whole quest to really woo candidates and employees, are we really having a race to the bottom? And where does one really draw the line? And that primarily is my question to the panelists. Is open to anyone who would love to answer, because I think in this war for talent, we can keep going out and wooing, but where do we really draw the line?
Urmi Chatterjee, would you like to take that question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. A favorite of mine, Sahil, because as long as it was a healthy competition to get talent and get the best talent, it seemed really wonderful for organizations, because we were doing the right things, the right assessments, etc., to get the right talent. But at this point of time, all organizations are facing the same challenge, right? You have really a war of talent, and in the process, there are talent coming in with already offers from other organizations that you get to know at the last moment. And then, already in the Indian market, we do have a challenge of the notice period, right? Which is unlike a lot of other countries. So we are already a little slower in terms of getting people up to speed when somebody leaves the organization, right? And on top of that, this has come. Now, we take a very balanced view of Sahil, that we will not be going overboard with owing talent at some point of time. And so some of the, we had to look at some of the backup options. So some of those we already spoke about it. One is engagement becomes all the more important now, because if you lose talent, there's a huge cost to it, which is that cost is much more than what you need to really engage and retain your talent. So that's a number one priority for us at this point of time. That two is like some of my colleagues mentioned, getting talent from the industry. And actually, we have been doing that for many years in Honeywell, which is getting people from the university and really speeding them up to be able to do that. So we have various programs, technology, behavioral leadership, all clubbed together, which we deliver, but we are doing it more and more now, because we realize that once we kind of get them, they have done an internship with us and we get them back, they know the culture, they know the organization, we train them, we get them fast, is a slightly easier opportunity. Other than skills, Sahil, which are really critical ones, where I may not have the option to do internally, I may not have the option to do to campuses, really going all out to do something, because it's not a sustainable model for any organization in the long run, right? It's not going to be cost effective, and you will not be able to engage those people, because 6 months down the line, somebody else will offer those people and they'll jump and go on board there. So that's a balanced view we have taken, that we really don't want to go overboard. We have our existing people and invest and engage them.
Okay. Okay, thanks for being with us, Sahil. Thank you indeed. Now to another question that is a broader issue, but it is a pressing issue. We're talking all this at a time when the participation of women in the workforce is falling. That's what the macro data tells you. So Chaitali, among all the list of some of the worries that you've mentioned, should this be added? And how serious is this? And how are companies looking to address that?
I think, Ashutosh, it's a serious issue. It's a very, very big issue. And I'll let me put it into perspective. Organizations have usually had good amount of women workforce. Organizations which have put effort towards it have had good amount of women workforce in the junior and the middle cadre. It is usually from that level that they start dropping out for whatever reasons. Those whatever reasons are known to us, it's more trying to balance the personal and the professional motivations, aspirations, and requirements. The whole pandemic situation of working digitally or virtually has posed a very challenging situation for this group of workforce. Imagine women workforce who have young kids, who are also caregivers for parents or in-laws, and have a full-time job to do. And for a very long time, they had no respite in terms of support system. And they were actually trying to handle all of it. Some of the brightest and the most career-focused women are the ones who have actually chosen to take temporary break or move out. And not because of any other reason, but because it just became insanely impossible for them to handle it. Now look at it from an organization's perspective. Organizations in all their intent want to be inclusive and want to take care of it. But this is a little bit of a societal issue than just what an organization and an employee can do. And I think a lot of them may actually get into becoming gigs temporarily. But even if they become gigs for a very long time, we will continue to have massive drain of great talent, huge potential that will actually leave the workplace. And organizations may need to think of completely different ways of supporting that. I know PwC has done a hell lot of stuff for that. Pushing for women who wanting to go on leave, take part-time, take 3 days a week, take 4 days a week, ensuring we are having conversation with their managers to say, give them some break. But yet, like I mentioned, these are career conscious women. They are the ones who are taking the break because they don't want it easy. They want to be at par. And when they are not, nobody's actually coming and catching hold of them and saying that, you are not doing good enough. They are the ones who are self-conscious. Now, from an organization's perspective, to lose that group of talent who is not jumping for money, who is not jumping because somebody else is saying that you're doing a little less, but the ones who are the best perhaps, is a big loss. And I think as an industry, as society, we will have to do something about it. Otherwise, 48 to 50% of the population that we aspire to have will keep going down and down. So yeah, I think it's a huge problem.
Yes, certainly. Amit Andhra has raised his hand. Amit, you almost read my mind because I was going to come to you. What could possibly learning and development be like or do to ensure that this talent pool is tapped into? And well, I'm not sure whether it can be stopped from falling, but at least companies can find a way to engage with them.
The only thing which comes to my mind for this question is the alignment. Every organization is adopting different learning strategies, different learning methodologies, transactional deliveries, LMSs, boot camps, hire, train, deploy models. Having said that, if the participants, if the people, if the workforce are aligned to an objective with which organization is investing in scaling them up and giving that experience, will certainly be a game changer for appropriate success in adapting the learning strategies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, Ina, if I can come to you, this issue about with the nature of work, again, this is about the talent. So when the nature of work is changing, how do you analyze and assess the best performing set of people and this changing demand? How this, because this is the target is constantly changing. How do you keep them motivated to keep learning and moving ahead? What can be done?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, Ashutosh. I think, the pandemic has had its different phases, right? I think the phase that we are at right now is that majority of the workforce is actually feeling fatigued. Right, they've gone through their set of complexities. They've gone through, all kind of situations that they've had to deal with. A lot of grief, personal sort of, tragedies that they have to deal with. And now I think it's come to a stage where it's a very difficult sort of dynamic for organizations to deal with, because on one side, the businesses are trying to get back into full gear. They are expecting the next level of performance from employees. The employees are fatigued, and they are thinking whether to get meaning out of work or look for the purpose out of work. And then I think the larger question right now is that more and more that I talk to people, they are just overwhelmed with everything that's going on, be it on their personal side or the professional or the organization side, especially employees who are in phases of life, who are parents or who are caregivers. I think it's the overwhelming feeling just continues, and the challenge of time is actually keeping them away from really leveraging the talent development opportunities that the organizations are supporting. So I think, there's a huge conversation that's going on even internally in our organization that fine, people are learning, but the enthusiasm that we saw last year, as compared to this year at this point in time, has dampened a little. And when we do pulse checks, with employees, they say that there are just too many meetings happening. There is absolutely no time. And if organizations are expecting them to take out time from their personal time, let's say the weekends, then that's also not fair. So I think we're trying to see how, the talent ecosystem can really play that in. So it's a paradoxical situation, so to say, to be with. And I think one of the things that we've sort of tried to sort of deal with it in a way is that we've tried to reinforce our leadership signatures or the culture aspect of it, because more and more that we started talking to people, we realized that they are questioning the basis of why they are going through what they're going through, right? So the only way out of that whole equation is if we are able to give them that sense of why, why is it that sense of belonging? Why is it that they're a part of the organization? Why is it that they're putting in discretionary effort? Why is it that, amongst all of the things happening, they have to prioritize development? We've just started those conversations, and we're just hoping that that pays out. But, it's really, a juggle between a lot of trials and errors, essentially.
Uphill battle, that's what it appears like. Amit, Mehta, so what can companies do to have that culture of learning? And again, the context is so stark in everyone's faces that it's a tough time where you've had just about everyone in the family and around you seems to be on some kind of a screen.
Yeah, I think first is recognition of the fact, listen, the world has changed, and the fact that the kind of skills that are going to be required in the foreseeable future are going to be very different. And any learning and development intervention which is point in time won't work. So I think first is just level setting and going back to the business leaders and the leadership across the board as to, first of all, what's the business going to do, and what are the implications of the new normal for the business, and therefore what are the kind of skill sets that the company requires across the board. I think that's really the starting point. Any learning intervention in the absence of that is going to be short-lived. Then I think that's where the participation of the line of business and the learning team and the technology team comes in, which says, okay, this is the landscape of skills that we need, because skills are going to get morphed. Interestingly, McKinsey came up with the research which said, listen, they're going to be like 100 million people who are going to have transitioned into newer occupations by 2030. And a lot of people are actually going to move away from the low scale, low wage environment into high skill just by virtue of the digitization effort. So I think that essentially means that the organization sits down, listen, what's the skill landscape that we require? Once we establish the skill landscape, then I think it's really going ahead and deploying what the learning need assessment is across different roles, different types, and then deploy that in a manner which is functional and which actually ensures that something gets done at the end of it, which means it's a combination of self-paced, self-learning kind of digital models, plus instructor-led interventions with on-the-job, hands-on lab kind of experiences. So as we speak to the largest companies, and that then becomes a perpetual way of learning, because once you do digitization, or once you take that path of digitization, you will solve one business problem today, but that will morph into a different opportunity 12 months from now, which will require a different set of skills. So unless you have that perpetual learning environment which keeps the running, learning engine humming and drumming, you will keep hitting the roof again and again. So I think that continuous learning environment therefore becomes critical. Again, ties down to business goals and your learning plans related to those goals.
Urmi Chatterjee, since you look at so many different countries, is there some best practices to learn from other countries and from, in corporate India? Are there some best practices? Have you learned something which has been very good and could help companies? For people who are listening to you, they'd love to hear it from you, coming from you.
Sure, absolutely, Ashutosh. I mean, we do have a lot of best practices still in India and as a part of APAC, which we always share. And a number of countries, APAC is still going through the pandemic, other than maybe China, the rest of the APAC is still reeling quite a bit under the pandemic. So some of the best practices which I did see was in certain countries, the workforce has been quite agile to be back, in terms of what I mean by that is, one is that there are certain countries where the recovery was faster of the pandemic and people have been back in office and kind of appreciating the fact that after a long time that they have started coming. And we have started doing it in multiple countries, including in India, where between October to December, we are really exploring how over a certain, gradual increase we can be back. From a learning and development perspective, it's been almost everywhere across as a global organization we have done. And something someone mentioned on, Lnd, almost like a Netflix, kind of model. And we have rolled out something very similar across countries globally now, where it's more a self-paced learning, because we realized that earlier we would push development a lot to people. Whereas now balancing between work and the work hours have also not remained when we were physically going to office, there were certain hours that we were out of work, but all of that has kind of gone, because now it's almost 24/7 that you are with your laptop and calls and things like that. So what we did was more like an on-demand kind of a training. So there are modules across the board for all types of roles, and for a particular role, what are the ones you need to do, and you can do it's a self-paced learning. You can pick up at your choice each module over a period of a week, a month, and do it. And that seems to be something where we are not pushing people. We are not telling them, come and develop yourself. So across certain countries, that's working really well from that perspective. The other thing I'd like to call out is because diversity initiatives kind of came into the picture, the role of women, there are certain countries where, actually during this talent war, people are looking at diversity as an opportunity to get a different kind of talent to the workforce. So the definition of diversity is expanding in many countries in multiple different ways, because they are a source of talent which you may have not looked at till date, right? And so it's just not the man-woman conversation that we have with diversity, but different measures of diversity that you can have, including veterans in certain countries, right? Where, people who have retired, army retired people. And I see in certain countries in APAC, they're really looking and exploring at different categories of talent and calling the diversity, the definition of diversity in a much wider spectrum, so that your reachability to talent just goes up.
Okay. Chaitali, since you raised, I'm still reeling under all the issues that you've raised, really. But on a serious note, since you raised some of those issues, what could be some possible short-term solutions and some right steps that companies need to take to maybe ensure that some of these problems don't stare them in the face too much?
So it may sound simplistic, but it isn't. But the answer is, in good old days, or let's take the example of an institution or family. When in March, April, May, when COVID hit the second wave in the country was doing what it was doing, but for employees, the organization stood up. And this is pretty consistent regardless of which organization we are talking about. Every organization, regardless of size, scale, span, stood up and took measures for their people. Mm-hmm. It was a display of familial thinking. It's now time to actually have a straight conversation with employees. Is it fair to have a transactional approach to your family, to your organization, which stood up for you? I think that is where it has to start. I think we expect organizations to do everything for us because as workforce, we believe we are extremely valuable. But we also need to understand employer is one of your biggest identities. And there is a time when you also have to take pride in your employer and be with the employer. If your organization did not treat you well during those kind of times, by all means, you have the right, to feel whatever you feel and take the call. But if your organization treated you well, actually took care not just of you, but your family, and did all that it could way beyond its means. Think about organizations where there were multiple cases that was happening. What pains me, Ashutosh, is immediately after that scenario, human beings have a very short-term memory. We are talking about great resignation and the layoff and all that is happening. Most organizations, global organizations, are talking about this whole 30-40% increase and the impact of that on the paycheck component of the P&L for organizations. And the impact of that on India being viewed as a country which can actually continuously attract good talent at the right price. So eventually it will come and hit off the employees as well if they don't think organization purpose along with individual purpose. We all have the right as individuals to think about what's right for me, but also caring a little about the organization. So I think it's a two-way street that we may need to do. What can organizations do? Have a very open conversation. If employees are talking about well-being, an important part of well-being is trusting conversation. So if an employee actually comes and puts that paper on the table, have a conversation and say, did the organization take care of you? I think there is no other short-term solution to that.
Got it. Gets back to some of the management reading where the organization goals to become your own goals. Just makes me think of that. Let's just take some more questions that have come in. And this one comes from Jasmeet Singh. And I'll just read out the question that Jasmeet has written. Since offices are being opened in a hybrid way, where some of the manpower is physically present and remaining are working remotely, which is becoming another challenge for managers to manage the workforce. So his broad question is, what is the best way to deal with it? Ina, would you like to take that question?
Yes, Ashutosh. So I think, one of the ways to deal with the situation is that depending on what approach the organization is taking for their return to work, the organization can set that as a standard at an organization level to meet the business demands, like Urmi was mentioning, that some roles will be required for some businesses to come physically into the office space and collaborate so that the business outcomes don't take a hit. But I think the power needs to still be given at the hands of the people managers to actually decide that, based on the individual employee needs and based on the different scenarios that might come up once the return to work happens, how do they use flexibility to cater to those requirements, right? There could be hiring challenges like, organizations, especially for niche skills when they're trying to look for talent. There are a lot of people who are making the demand or asking the question that what is your organization's work arrangement policy now? If it is, hybrid, sorry, I'm not interested. I want to work from home. In that context, it's really, it depends on the leader or the people manager to take a decision that do they want to put hybrid work arrangement on the top, or do they actually value the skill that they're trying to get into the organization? So I hope that answers, Jagmeet.
Yeah, sure. And the next question, so this the name is not mentioned here, and it says most of the companies adopted a digital first approach during this pandemic. When this digital transformation approach, with this digital transformation approach, the ransomware attacks increased. How and what can HR play a role in making safe digital and making the organization safe and secure with such a transition? Amit, Mehta, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, listen, I don't think so. This is so much of an HR issue as opposed to as opposed to it being an IT issue. So clearly, I think one of the things that's the reality of today is the attack surface has increased dramatically, and as what happens is as more and more people are in the phase of moving their IT and deciding what to do with IT, I think just the number of ransomware attacks have gone. So the only way we can fix it is through having a robust IT response strategy. HR necessarily can only participate in how, for instance, these people are recruited, the exit process, the process which disables their email ID and the access to different websites in the company. I think the way HR can play a role is just strengthen the processes of the exit process and just cutting off the access to the system. Other than that, I think it's the company IT security policy which then needs to step in and do whatever is best to manage the attacks, ransomware attacks.
Surely. It is the HR and probably some of the keep that habit of safety among all the people, among some of those practices that one last question I think we'll take. Sushmita saying, since we have so many women today, I'd love more questions coming in from women as well. In the hybrid model of working, staff working from home are reeling under the stress of being victims of out of sight, out of mind syndrome. Now that's a serious one. How are managers planning to address these concerns? Urmi, would you like to take this? Is
yes,
it a
Ashutosh,
reality?
I really don't think so, because I felt that during this period, there was a huge amount of focus on employee engagement, right? Even compared to when we were physically in office, right? At the back of every manager and every HR was the fact that, we are not connecting, right? So we saw a huge increase in terms of connectivity that our managers were doing, and not just official one-on-ones and connectivity. There were a lot of fun events involving family, which you would otherwise not do in a normal office setting, just to be able to be well connected. So I think what, Ashutosh, can happen, which I mentioned in the beginning, is maybe the new joinees who have not been able to build that relationship with people in the last 18 months is a slight, the focus area for us in the next few months, because that's where, since they have never been in sight, it's odd to say they're not in sight and it's not in mind also, because they've never been in front of those managers for them to be able to build that. I would say that is a population which should be a priority for all of us in the organization to focus on. But my personal belief and what I've seen in the past few months, and maybe Chaitali or the others can comment on, is a huge increase in manager connectivity and employee engagement that was driven by organizations, both from a wellness perspective, because, even managers were really well connected when employee and their families were unwell, their vaccinations, and end to end of their personal lives, which I don't think has happened prior to the pandemic. So I really thought that it went up, but would be glad to hear some of the other colleagues if they have different opinions.
Okay.
So I'll just say one thing, Ashutosh, over here. Out of sight, out of mind may have been for any employee, regardless of gender. Because there has been, managers have tried their level best, but it's a two-way street. And because it is a two-way street, if after a certain point it's not happening with one employee, in exceptional cases, if that is the one, then I don't know. But usually, if it's a two-way street and you keep the street open, then regardless of gender, it will be an open one.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've almost run out of time for this conversation. Such a serious issue, so many issues raised. Amit, Andre, can I request you for a vote of thanks, please?
Certainly. Thanks, Ashutosh. I would, it's absolutely a very serious topic. Having said that, it's very important that each one of us is evaluating it with a lot of dedication, a lot of perseverance, and a lot of solution-based approach, and that's fantastic. I would really like to thank everybody, Urmi, Ina, Chaitali, Pallavi, Amit, all of you, Ashutosh, and the entire team who has taken out time and instigated thoughts in all the audience on what would be the pathway or direction to think of to overcome few of these challenges, which are day-to-day challenges for each one of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amit, for those words. And thank you, everyone, for taking out the time for this, which has been something so critical. And I think I just need to go back and read about the issues that Chaitali raised. Trust me, Chaitali, you've stirred something in my mind. And indeed, listening to everyone has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and look forward to you being on the Economic Times very soon again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.